Hi, everybody. I'm Tanya Pobeda. I'm a PhD candidate at the Communication and Culture program at Ryerson and York Universities. And this is my presentation. I didn't see anyone who looked like me, gender and racial representation in board gaming. And this is being presented at the Canadian Games Studies Association. And I'm really, really happy and pleased to be here. So first of all, this is an intersectional analysis of the board gaming industry and hobby. And really, we're looking at systems of power in this particular sphere of gaming. And as Kimberly Crenshaw said, intersectionality is a lens through which you can see where power comes and collides, where it interlocks and intersects. And what I'm looking for is an empirical look at how gender and racial dynamics and dimensions play out in board gaming. And what you're going to see is a bunch of different measures, a bunch of different methodologies that I have used to kind of create a picture of what's going on right now in contemporary board gaming, both hobby cultures as well as within its industry. So the big finding from my research is I conducted a very rigorous, very lengthy process of looking at who creates the top 400 Board Game Geek ranked games. And for those who don't know, Board Game Geek is a massive online global repository of all things board games. Games are ranked by users, so it's a crowdsourced effort. And I wanted to find out, of the 400 top most ranked games, who created those games? Who were the designers that were involved? And as you can see here, having conducted a pretty rigorous demographic analysis looking against, again, the dimensions of gender and race, what I found was overwhelmingly white male creators of these games at 92.6%. BIPOC men made up 4.1% of that total amount of designers, and white women represented 3.3%. There were no BIPOC women in the design category of those top ranked games. So overwhelmingly, it is a white male industry in terms of these particular games, the 400 top ranked games. I also conducted an online survey of board game enthusiasts and industry professionals through late last year. And what I found was a lot of people wanted to share a lot of different perspectives with me. I did a Likert scale for the most part through most of the questions, but a lot of people wrote in their own comments. And here's an example of a comment from somebody in Canada talking about the fact that their board game convention is whiter than Wonder Bread, and the game designer club that they attend has an all-male attendance 95% of the time. So I got a lot of write-in commentary as well. And I was really struck, of the 320 people that participated in the survey, so many people wrote, very generous with their time, wrote in a lot of different perspectives of their experiences in the board gaming hobby and industry. And it was an incredibly rich data set as a result. The other thing that I looked at was the top 200 games and who was featured on the top of the boxes. So the cover art of the board game boxes. And what I did was literally count every single figure on those boxes of the top 200 Board Game Geek ranked games. And using a very strict coding analysis, and I had other coders validate my work, what I found was overwhelmingly that it was male representation. Where human representation appeared, it was 76.8% male presenting and 23.2% feminine or female presenting characters. The divide was even bigger when I looked at the dimension of race. 17.5% were BIPOC presenting, and 82.5% were white presenting. So a pretty stark disparity there as well. And one of the things that I get asked a lot about this kind of research that I'm conducting is I'm not looking at negative representation. I'm looking at the totality, this sort of sweep of the total number of figures that appear on the box. And again, what you can see here is a pretty stark disparity. Here's another perspective that I got against the question of representation from people who are very enthusiastic about games. The vast majority of the people who participated in my survey play games at least once a week at 70.4%. So very, very dedicated gamers. And what we got in one write-in comment against a question of representation is, I'm never going to see Indigenous people represented as anything other than barbarians in need of civilization. I've stopped caring for the most part, because if I cared, I'd be mad all the time, and I don't have the mental energy for that anymore. So that was an anonymous comment that I got. The other interesting thing, this is actually a dimension that I wanted to take a look at. Erin Ryan actually created a study years ago looking at cover art and prominence. And what she discovered is you're more likely to find an image of a sheep on a board game box than you would an image of a woman. And it was a smaller sample size, but a terrific analysis. And what I did is I asked myself, is that true of this particular sample of the top 200 games? And what I found was, no, there were more women than sheep, but there were more creatures that didn't exist, unless we believe in aliens. Perhaps we do. Aliens and fantastic creatures outnumbered the representation of women on the boxes. So the vast majority of the figures that actually appeared on the boxes were animals or fantastic creatures. Human representation trailed slightly behind that, but you're again more likely to see an image of a creature that doesn't exist, an orc, an imp, something like that, dragon, than you would an image of a woman. Okay. The other really disheartening thing that I discovered is you're more likely to see an image of a bird than you would a BIPOC women. BIPOC women representation on board games was diminishingly rare. 35 of the nearly 2,000 figures that I identified on the cover arts boxes were BIPOC women. So incredibly, incredibly rare occurrence when it did happen. And you're, again, more likely to see an image of a bird than you would a BIPOC woman on a board game box. So again, with that online survey that I conducted, it was a really concerted effort that I was making to hear from board gamers that haven't been heard from much at all before. I looked at a lot of hobbyist sort of census activities, publishers that had attempted to do some market research. And what I was asking for with this study, although no one was excluded, was I wanted to hear from women. I wanted to hear from people who were non-binary, LGBTQ. I wanted to hear from BIPOC people who board game. And what I got back was, this was the split in terms of participation. 54.4% were women who filled out the survey that I conducted. 19.9% were men. 12.2% were trans. And 13.6% were non-binary. So a real diversity of perspective. And that's definitely the experience that I have in the spaces where I play, that it is remarkably diverse. There's a tremendous amount of interest, and it is not simply white men. They're not necessarily playing in the establishment places, the friendly local game stores, or the going to the conventions. And that's another aspect of the study that I conducted. The other thing was, I asked, what best describes your sexual orientation? And 8.2% were pansexual, 47.2% were heterosexual, identified that way. Bisexual was 20.4%, gay 9.4%, biromantic 0.6%, asexual 6.9%. And again, that's the kind of diversity of sexual orientation that I got from the survey participants. And what I also found really compelling and interesting is there's a really interesting correlation between those who have completed the highest possible levels of education and those who are really, really interested in board games. So definitely, as I compared it to sort of population statistics in Canada and the US, this was a hypothesis I had. What I found was the participants in the survey that I conducted, 320 people, it was higher than the average population in terms of those who hold master's degrees or PhDs. Master's degrees, 28.5%, and PhDs, 6.9%. So way above the population average in both Canada and the US. The other thing that I really wanted to get to the bottom of is whether or not representation mattered to people who play board games. And in this case, play board games incredibly actively, at, again, 70.4% who said they played a board game at least once a week. 83.6% agreed or strongly agreed that board gaming has a problem with a lack of equitable gender representation in board game artwork. Now, none of these participants were exposed to my work in terms of the empiricism of that, the idea that representation is quite lacking on board game artwork. They were not aware of that. This was their own perspective. And I thought that was quite interesting. So they're feeling the gap definitely in board game representation. The other thing that I found out was 80.2% agreed or strongly agreed that board gaming has a problem with a lack of equitable representation in games design. They understood and were telling me with a great deal of passion, there's a huge percentage that were strongly agreeing with this statement, that game design is actually very skewed to a very limited demography of mostly white males. And I wanted to find out, if does this figure into any kind of action or deep feeling on the part of the community. And again, you can see a level of passion with these responses. This is a Likert scale, and strongly agree is often tricky to get. But what I got here was 51.9% strongly agreeing that they wish that board game publishing companies would publish more games designed by women designers. So that was a very interesting finding. And again, 29.6% agreed with that statement. So an overwhelming majority really wish they had more to choose from. And I wish board gaming publishers would publish more games designed by BIPOC designers. Again, a high degree of passion, even more so than with women, at 52.8%, strongly agreeing. Again, a level of passion in that agreeing, that category, and 28.9% agreeing. So again, the vast majority of the participants of this study really wish the publishing industry would give them more options to choose from. And this was another really interesting finding, that they wish that more non-binary designers their games were being selected and published, at 46.9% strongly agreeing and 26.4% agreeing with that statement. One of the really interesting things about the research that I'm conducting, and I think that I'm really, really heartened and happy that more and more people are entering the board game scholarship space. But there is a real impact when something, it's a old Drucker quote, when something is measured, it gets managed. And my goal with starting this work and research and creating this PhD dissertation and other studies that I've conducted is to make an impact on the industry. Because the board game industry is often it's a mom and pop kind of industry. There isn't a lot of professionalization happening, in board game corners. It's often very small organizations. They're a little bit opaque. Maybe don't have established workflows or things built into their quality assurance process, like cultural sensitivity reviews. And one of the things I'm hoping with this research is to really have an impact on the board game industry, to make some positive change. And this was something that happened just a little earlier in the year, where I actually heard from a designer who was responding to a TikTok that was actually done about my research by an amazing channel on TikTok called 1 Minute Board Games, which I highly recommend you check out. And he responded that he felt so strongly about the research that I had created around cover art and disparity in board game design opportunities, that he pushed his publisher to ensure that a BIPOC woman was included on his cover. And I think I actually burst into tears when I saw this, because he was really, really wanting to push the industry a little bit further. And this is an incredibly great example of what is positive representation, I believe, and really fills a gap right now in terms of BIPOC women specifically, but BIPOC in general, representation on board game artwork. So this is me. This is how you get in touch with me. And my research is still ongoing. It's still going through peer review. I hope to have a few articles out in the coming months. And I really do welcome questions and discussion about this. These are the sort of sweep of my numbers. And I really do welcome feedback, discussion, further questions. I have so much data I don't have time to share today, but I really am really, really excited to chat with you all and hear your presentations as well. Thanks so much.